There are moments in television that transcend entertainment. Moments when something so profound happens that everyone watching knows they're witnessing something they'll never forget. What happened when 9-year-old Margaret Chen stepped onto the Family Feud stage was one of those moments. She looked frail, moving slowly with the help of her great-grandson, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of a lifetime of experiences, of stories untold, of wisdom earned through decades of living. Steve Harvey greeted her with his usual warmth, but within minutes, everything would change. Because what this elderly woman whispered to him during a commercial break would stop the show cold and leave 200 people in the audience gasping in disbelief. If you've ever wondered whether one person can really make a difference in this world, you need to hear what Margaret Chen had to say. Before we begin, if you believe in the power of truth and the courage it takes to speak it, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel because we share real stories that remind us what it means to be human. Margaret Chen had been born in 1930 in a small village in rural China. Her childhood was marked by war, famine, and unimaginable hardship. When she was just 8 years old, Japanese forces invaded her province, and everything changed overnight. Her father, a schoolteacher, was taken away. Her mother had to flee with Margaret and her 2 younger brothers, walking for weeks through dangerous territory to reach safety. They survived on whatever they could find: roots from the ground, water from streams, the kindness of strangers who had little to give but gave it anyway. Margaret's mother used to tell her children, "Remember everything you see, remember everyone who helps us, because someday, when you have the chance, you must help others the same way." Those words would shape the rest of Margaret's life. By the time Margaret was 12, she had witnessed things no child should ever see. She had watched people die from starvation. She had seen the cruelty that humans could inflict on one another. She had also seen extraordinary acts of kindness, people sharing their last bit of food with strangers, families taking in orphaned children even when they could barely feed their own. These experiences carved something deep into Margaret's soul, the understanding that life was precious, that every moment mattered, and that what we do for others is the only thing that truly lasts. When the war finally ended, Margaret's father never returned. Her mother worked herself to exhaustion to keep her children alive, and she succeeded, barely. By the time Margaret was 16, her mother's health was failing from years of malnutrition and stress. On her deathbed, she made Margaret promise something. "Live fully," she told her daughter. "Don't just survive life, and help others live too." Margaret kept that promise. In 1952, at the age of 22, she managed to immigrate to the United States. She arrived in San Francisco with $12 in her pocket, unable to speak English, knowing no one. She worked in a laundry for 14 hours a day, learning English from customers and from old newspapers she would find in the trash. She studied at night by candlelight in the tiny room she rented with 3 other Chinese immigrants. Within 2 years, she could read and write English well enough to get a better job. Within 5 years, she was managing the laundry. Within 10 years, she owned her own small business, a tailor shop where she employed other immigrants and taught them the skills they needed to succeed. But Margaret's real work wasn't her business. Her real work was what she did in the shadows, what she never talked about, what her family wouldn't discover until decades later. Starting in the late 1950s and continuing for the next 50 years, Margaret Chen sponsored immigrants. Not just Chinese immigrants, but people from all over the world who were trying to escape war, poverty, persecution, trying to build better lives in America. She used her own money she'd saved from her modest business, to help pay for their documentation, their travel, their first few months of rent and food. She did this quietly, asking for nothing in return, not even acknowledgement. She would meet these people at the airport or the bus station, help them find housing, connect them with jobs, teach them how to navigate their new country. Most of them never knew her full name. They just knew her as Annie Margaret, the woman who had given them a chance. By the time Margaret was in her 70s, she had helped sponsor more than 200 people. 200 human beings who might have died in refugee camps or war zones or from poverty now had lives, families, futures. And Margaret had done it all while living in a modest 1-bedroom apartment, driving a 20-year-old car, buying her clothes from thrift stores. Her own children, she had 2 sons, sometimes wondered why their mother lived so frugally when her business was doing well. She would just smile and say, "I have everything I need." What they didn't know was that every extra dollar she made went to someone who needed it more. What they didn't know was that their mother was quietly changing the world, one person at a time. At 94 years old, Margaret was in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's disease. Most days, she didn't remember where she was. She would confuse her great-grandchildren with her own children. She would speak in Cantonese, even though she'd been speaking English fluently for 70 years. But her great-grandson, David, who was 28 and her primary caregiver, had noticed something interesting. When Margaret watched Family Feud, something would shift. She would become more alert, more present. She would laugh at Steve Harvey's jokes. She would shout out answers to the questions. For those 30 minutes, it was like having his great-grandmother back. So David did something he thought might give Margaret one last moment of joy, one last adventure. He applied for her to be a contestant on Family Feud. He gathered their whole family, Margaret's two sons who were now in their 60s, her 4 grandchildren, her 7 great-grandchildren. They all flew to Los Angeles together, knowing that this might be one of the last times Margaret would be coherent enough to experience something like this. They were hoping for a fun memory, a chance to see her smile one more time. They had no idea what was about to happen. When they arrived at the studio, Margaret seemed confused at first. She kept asking where they were, why there were so many people. But then Steve Harvey walked out, and something clicked. Her eyes focused in a way David hadn't seen in months. She smiled, really smiled, and said clearly, "I know him. I watch him every day." The show's producers were careful with Margaret. They positioned her so she could sit down if needed. They made sure she was comfortable. They were prepared to be gentle with an elderly woman who clearly had some cognitive issues. What they weren't prepared for was what happened during the introductions. Steve Harvey walked over to the Chen family with his trademark energy. "All right, we've got the Chen family here, and I've got to tell you folks, when I saw we had a 9-year-old contestant, I knew this was going to be special." The audience applauded warmly. Steve approached Margaret, who was sitting in a chair they'd brought out for her. "Mistress Chen, 94 years young. You look amazing. Tell me, what's your secret to a long life?" Margaret looked up at him with those sharp eyes, and for a moment, David saw his great-grandmother exactly as she must have been 50 years ago, strong, clear, fully present. "Hard work," she said simply, "and helping others." Steve nodded enthusiastically. "That's beautiful. That's what I'm talking about. Hard work and helping others. Those are good values right there." He started to move on to introduce the rest of the family, but Margaret reached out and gently touched his arm. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice soft but urgent. Steve paused, something in her tone making him stop completely. "Of course, Mistress Chen, what is it?" Margaret looked around at the cameras, the audience, her family. She seemed to be deciding something, weighing something in her mind. Then she gestured for Steve to come closer. "Can you lean down?" she asked. "I need to whisper." Steve smiled, thinking this was going to be something sweet and grandmotherly, maybe a compliment or a joke. He leaned down, bringing his ear close to her mouth. And that's when Margaret Chen whispered one sentence that would change everything. Steve Harvey's face went through a transformation. His smile disappeared. His eyes widened. He stood up straight, looking down at Margaret with an expression of complete shock. His mouth opened but no words came out. He turned to look at his producers, then back at Margaret, then at the audience. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I need to stop for a moment. Can we cut to commercial?" The audience, sensing something serious had happened, went completely silent. The producers immediately called for a break, and the cameras stopped rolling. But everyone in the studio knew something extraordinary had just occurred. During the commercial break, Steve Harvey pulled Margaret's family aside. "Did you know?" he asked them, his voice intense with emotion. "Did you know what your mother did?" David and the rest of the family looked confused. "What do you mean?" David asked. "What did she tell you?" Steve looked back at Margaret, who was sitting calmly in her chair, as if she had just shared the most normal information in the world. He turned back to the family, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Your grandmother just told me that in 1987, when I was homeless living in my car, trying to make it as a comedian, she gave me money for food." The family stared at him in stunned silence. "What?" David finally said. "That's not possible. I mean, no offense, but my great-grandmother has Alzheimer's. She barely remembers what happened yesterday. She must be confused." But Steve Harvey shook his head. "She gave me specific details. She said it was a Friday night in Cleveland, outside a comedy club called The Laugh Factory. She said I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, and she was walking by after closing her tailor shop nearby. She said I looked hungry and lost, and she knocked on my window and handed me $40. She said, 'Buy yourself a meal and don't give up on your dreams.'" David's grandfather, Margaret's oldest son, suddenly grabbed Steve's arm. "Cleveland? My mother had a tailor shop in Cleveland. We lived there until 1992. Steve continued, "She told me she'd been watching the show for years, and when she saw me, she remembered. She said she'd helped a lot of people over the years, but she wanted me to know about that one because she was proud of what I'd become. The family was speechless. Steve Harvey had tears running down his face. I need you to understand something, he said. That $40 that moment, it saved my life. I was ready to give up. I was sleeping in my 1976 Ford, showering at gas stations, eating one meal a day if I was lucky. I had done a show that night and bombed badly. The club owner paid me $50, and I used that money for gas to get to the next city. But I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I was sitting in that car thinking maybe this was crazy. Maybe I should just give up and go back to Cleveland and get a regular job. And then this little Chinese lady knocked on my window. I rolled it down, and she handed me money. I tried to refuse it, but she insisted. She said, "I can see you're chasing a dream. Don't let hunger stop you." I used that money to buy groceries that lasted me a week. But more than the food, it was what she represented. It was proof that there were still good people in the world. It was a sign that maybe I should keep going. And I did. When the show came back from commercial, Steve Harvey stood in front of the camera with a completely different energy than before. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice serious, "something just happened that I need to share with you. This isn't about the game anymore. This is about something much bigger." He walked over to Margaret and knelt down beside her chair so he was at eye level with her. "Mistress Chen," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you just told me something during the break that I need to confirm. In 1987, in Cleveland, did you give money to a homeless man outside a comedy club?" Margaret nodded, and suddenly her eyes were completely clear, completely present, as if the fog of Alzheimer's had lifted just for this moment. "Yes," she said. "You were so skinny, so sad looking. I thought, this boy needs help. So I helped." Steve Harvey's voice broke as he spoke. "That was me. I was that homeless man. And what you did that night, that $40 you gave me, it kept me going. It helped me believe that maybe I could make it. And here we are, all these years later, and you're on my show." The audience gasped collectively. Some people screamed. Others started crying immediately. Margaret looked at Steve with a slight smile. "I thought it might be you," she said. "When I started watching your show, I thought, maybe this is that boy from Cleveland. You have same kind eyes. Still kind, even now." Steve was openly weeping now, and he didn't care who saw it. "Mistress Chen, do you realize what you did? You didn't just give me $40. You gave me hope when I had none left. You saw me when I was invisible. You cared about a stranger when you had no reason to." Margaret reached out and patted his hand, and when she spoke, her voice was stronger than it had been all day. "I was stranger once too. When I came to America, I had nothing. People helped me. American people, kind people. They didn't know me, but they helped anyway. So when I had something to give, I give to others. That's what we're supposed to do. We help each other. That's what makes us human." David stepped forward, still in shock. "Steve, we had no idea. My great-grandmother never told us about any of this. We knew she helped people. We knew she sponsored some immigrants. But we didn't know the full extent." Steve stood up and faced the audience. "This woman, this 94-year-old woman sitting right here, she didn't just help me. Her grandson tells me she's spent the last 70 years helping people, sponsoring immigrants, giving money to people in need, changing lives one person at a time. And she never asked for credit. She never asked for recognition. She just did it because that's who she is." He turned back to Margaret. "You told me not to give up on my dreams. Well, those dreams came true. I've been on television for decades now. I've been able to provide for my family, to create opportunities, to help others the way you helped me. And I've spent my career trying to lift up other people, trying to give back the way you gave to me. But I never knew who you were. I never got to say thank you. Until today." Margaret looked at him with those clear, kind eyes. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "You thank me by becoming a good man, by helping others, by using your success to lift up people. That's the best thank you. That's what I wanted." Steve Harvey shook his head, tears still streaming down his face. "No, Mom, with all due respect, I do need to thank you. And I need to make sure everyone knows what you did. Not just for me, but for all those other people you helped over the years." He turned to the audience and the cameras. "This woman represents everything that's right about humanity. She came to this country with nothing. She survived things most of us can't imagine. And instead of becoming bitter, instead of just taking care of herself, she spent her entire life lifting up others. 200 people. That's how many immigrants her family tells me she sponsored. 200 lives changed. 200 families given a chance. And who knows how many random acts of kindness like the one she showed me. How many people did she help that we'll never know about?" The audience was on their feet now, applauding through tears. Margaret looked slightly embarrassed by all the attention. Too much no, she said, but she was smiling. Steve laughed through his tears. Yes, Mum, we are making too much no's. But you deserve it. You deserve all of this and more. What happened next surprised everyone, including Steve. Margaret's grandson David stepped forward and asked if he could say something. Steve handed him the microphone. My great-grandmother has Alzheimer's, David said, his voice shaking with emotion. Most days, she doesn't remember who I am. She doesn't remember she has great-grandchildren. She lives in a memory care facility, and we visit her as often as we can, but it's heartbreaking because she's mostly gone. Except when she watches your show, Steve. When Family Feud comes on, something changes. She becomes more alert, more present. She laughs, she engages. For those 30 minutes, I get my great-grandmother back. That's why I applied to bring her here. I wanted to give her one more adventure, one more moment of joy before she's completely gone. I thought maybe meeting you, being on the show, would make her happy. But I had no idea about any of this. I had no idea she'd helped you. I had no idea about the full extent of what she'd done for so many people. He looked at his great-grandmother with tears running down his face. And the fact that in the midst of her disease, in the midst of losing all her memories, she remembered you. She remembered that moment. It's like the universe gave us this gift. It's like it was meant to be. Because she may not remember tomorrow, but today right now she's here. She's present, and she got to hear you say thank you. Steve Harvey put his arm around David's shoulder. Your great-grandmother is a hero. A real hero. Not the kind we see in movies, but the kind that matters. The kind that changes lives through simple acts of kindness, through seeing people's humanity, through giving without expecting anything in return. He addressed the camera directly. And I want to say something to everyone watching this. We live in a world that celebrates wealth, fame, power. But this woman right here, she's what we should be celebrating. She's what success really looks like. Not because of what she accumulated, but because of what she gave away. Not because of what she built for herself, but because of what she built for others. The show resumed, but nobody really cared about the game anymore. The Chen family won their round, but it was almost beside the point. After the taping ended, Steve Harvey spent over an hour with Margaret and her family. He asked her to tell him more stories, and for those precious moments, Margaret's mind was clear. She told him about other people she'd helped, about the Vietnamese family she'd sponsored in 1975 after the fall of Saigon, about the Serbian refugees she'd helped in the 1990s, about the countless individuals she'd given money to over the years, just because she could see they needed it. I was hungry once, she kept saying. I was stranger in strange land once. I never forget that feeling. So when I see someone else in that position, I help. It's simple. Steve asked her why she never told her own family the full extent of what she'd done. Margaret smiled. It's not about getting credit, she said. It's about doing what's right. If I help someone so people will say I'm a good person, that's not really helping. That's just making myself feel important. I help because it needs to be done. That's all. Before they left the studio, Steve Harvey made a phone call. Within hours, his team had arranged something special. They contacted the National Immigration Forum and established the Margaret Chen Scholarship Fund. Steve personally donated $100,000 to start the fund, which would provide support for immigrants trying to establish themselves in America, just like Margaret had done for so many years. This fund will help people the way you helped me, Steve told her. It will keep your legacy going long after we're all gone. Margaret looked confused. But I'm nobody special, she said. I'm just old Chinese woman. Steve knelt down beside her again. You're not just anything. You're everything that matters. You're proof that one person can change the world. That kindness matters. That seeing people's humanity matters. That helping strangers matters. You're a hero, Mistress Chen. A real hero. The episode aired 3 weeks later. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times online. The comments section was flooded with people sharing their own stories of kindness they'd experienced or witnessed. Other celebrities came forward to talk about Margaret Chen. It turned out that the Vietnamese family she'd sponsored in 1975, one of their children had become a doctor, who now ran a free clinic. One of the Serbian refugees she'd helped had become a teacher, who educated hundreds of children. The ripple effects of Margaret's kindness extended far beyond anyone had imagined. A journalist tracked down as many of the 200 people Margaret had sponsored as they could find. They interviewed them, compiled their stories. Engineers, teachers, business owners, nurses, social workers, all of them owing their lives in America to an elderly Chinese woman who had given them a chance when no one else would. Together, these 200 people had raised over 800 children. Those children had gone on to have their own careers, their own families. One woman calculated that Margaret's direct help to 200 people had indirectly impacted over 3,000 lives. 3,000 people who might not exist, or whose lives would be dramatically different, all because of one woman's commitment to helping others. The Margaret Chen Scholarship Fund grew rapidly. Steve Harvey's donation was matched by other donors. Within 3 months, the fund had over $2 million. Within 6 months, they'd helped over 100 families. Each recipient received a letter explaining that the money came from a woman who had spent her life helping others, and that the only requirement was that they someday help someone else the same way. Margaret Chen passed away for months after the episode aired. She was surrounded by her family, at peace. David said that in her final weeks, there were moments of clarity where she would mention the show, mention Steve, and smile. "I got to say goodbye to him," she said once. "I got to hear thank you. That was gift." At her funeral, the room was packed. Her family expected maybe 50 people, but over 300 showed up. People she'd helped over the decades, their children and grandchildren, all coming to pay respects to a woman who had changed their lives. Steve Harvey flew in for the service and delivered part of the eulogy. "I stand before you today because of Margaret Chen," he said. "Not just because she gave me $40 in a parking lot in 1987, though that certainly mattered, but because she showed me what it means to be human. She showed me that success isn't measured by what we accumulate but by what we give away. That true wealth is measured by how many lives we touch. That we're all connected, that we all have a responsibility to help each other." Margaret Chen was an immigrant who came here with nothing, but she gave us everything that matters. She gave us an example of how to live, how to love, how to see the humanity in everyone we meet. She gave us hope. She gave us proof that kindness still exists, that people still care, that one person really can change the world. He paused, composing himself. "The last thing Margaret said to me at the studio was this: don't let people forget to help each other. Use your voice to remind them." So that's what I'm doing. I'm reminding all of us that we have a choice every single day. We can walk past people in need, or we can stop and help. We can hoard what we have, or we can share it. We can live for ourselves, or we can live for others. Margaret Chen chose to live for others. And because of that choice, thousands of lives are better, including mine. The story of Margaret Chen and Steve Harvey became more than just a viral moment. It became a movement. Schools started teaching about her, using her story to talk about immigration, kindness, and social responsibility. The phrase "be like Margaret" started trending, with people sharing stories of small acts of kindness they'd witnessed or performed. A documentary was made about her life, featuring interviews with the people she'd helped. The message was clear: you don't have to be rich or famous or powerful to change the world. You just have to care about people and act on that care. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness matters and that one person really can make a difference, please hit that like button and share this video with everyone you know. Subscribe to our channel because we need more stories like Margaret's in the world. We need to be reminded that despite all the division and anger and chaos around us, there are still people who care, people who help, people who see the humanity in everyone they meet. Margaret Chen proved that the most powerful thing any of us can do is simply help someone else. She proved that the ripple effects of kindness extend far beyond what we can see. And she proved that a life dedicated to lifting up others is a life well lived. That's the legacy of Margaret Chen, and that's a legacy worth remembering, worth celebrating, and most importantly worth emulating.